Welcome in, everybody. Got another episode of the Eating Your Dynasty show. Dan made it just on time.
Right in time. I rushed here. What's good?
What's going on, man?
Nice jersey.
Thanks, man. It's off season, which means it's shark season, so we're here.
Exciting. I'm looking forward to watching some Sharks this year. They got a nice, young, exciting roster. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. All right. We already got some people jumping in here. I'm going to catch up really quick before we get going on this offseason preview. I saw a couple good nuggets in the chat. Some of you guys have been dropping comments in there already. Appreciate you guys. The first one, Mike Eldridge says, or Mike S says, Eldridge is now ranked number 35 on MLB Pipeline, Tibbs number 88. I actually wouldn't be shocked if Eldridge climbs even higher in the next couple months because I don't think they've done their official reshuffle yet, but I could be wrong there.
Yeah, I agree. I think we kind of touched on it a little bit before. Honestly, if Bryce was in another organization, I think we'd see him probably top 15, top 10 with the season he just had. And at his age, those high ceiling guys like that normally would be ranked a lot higher, especially with his track record over the last year and a half. So I definitely think he will climb fast start of the 2025 season.
Yeah, it feels like he's still criminally underrated, which is disrespectful.
Yeah.
Which organization are you guys referring to?
We all know.
Honestly, I could go with two, and they're both in the same division.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, true.
That is true. The other one, I don't know if you guys saw actually, Dan, you texted us in the chat about it, but
I did.
Tito joining the Reds. I love that hire for them, honestly, especially because they've been kind of notoriously pretty cheap on that front, and good for them there because he's not going to be cheap. So good for them getting a big time manager.
I'm just kind of surprised, honestly, to see him returning to baseball with his health and his age. I honestly didn't think we'd see him again, but he's a great coach. I would have loved to have a guy like that on the Giants a few years ago before he went to Cleveland.
Yeah, for sure.
Definitely. All right, so we're going to hop right in. We're going to do the 2024/2025 offseason preview. It's not going to be so much of a recap of the season or anything like that. We're not going to dive too deep, I think, into players that they could pursue. We've already kind of done some of that, and then we have plenty of time this offseason to really dive into, people we're really wanting to see them pursue. Maybe we'll touch on some needs that they have. But this is kind of just to give a snapshot of where the Giants are financially, where the Giants, who's arbitration eligible, who's free agents, where they kind of stand with the 40-man, things like that. And then maybe at the end, we'll kind of talk a little bit about the GM search, because I know you guys have been kind of compiling your list here. So,
yeah, for sure.
And maybe we'll have to touch on this. Let's review on Bailey.
I'm always happy to touch on that. You guys know me.
Yeah, we've kind of off the channel discussed that already, so that'll be very interesting to see. But I don't think we're going to have any answers for quite a while. I think that's something that might play out over the course of the entire season. So,
yeah, for sure. I know one thing, Ricky, especially you've mentioned, is we'll really know how Buster feels about Bailey come draft.
Yeah.
If he invests super high in a catcher, which we had this kind of discussion the other day. I'm actually a big believer that they should draft a catcher in the first or second round, regardless of how you feel about Patrick Bailey. Because aside from the fact that Bailey is one foul tip away from his career possibly being over, and the Giants have absolutely nothing for catchers in the system, the catchers tend to carry their value really well, especially if they do well in the minors. You can trade those guys for stars later on. So there is nothing bad about having a really good catcher in the system.
Yeah, and the one young-ish catcher that we had in Sac, he just elected free agency. So now you got your choice of Blake Sable and Tom Murphy outside of Patrick Bailey. So yeah, if you don't invest in that position in free agency, you gotta draft one, at least, a college catcher.
Yeah. And we'll we might not know the answer on how Buster views Bailey, but I have an idea on how he views Tom Murphy. And we'll get to that one. So
yeah.
For sure. But just starting it off, for anybody wondering, this came from Jeff Young, who usually he puts a lot of good stuff, so give him a follow if you don't already on Twitter. But he kind of posted a snapshot of where they stand financially, and I don't remember what the website he was referring to. It was like cap.com, or I don't know. It was something like that. You can also look at like Roster Resource. They give you a pretty decent idea. But currently, as it stands, they have 116.125 million guaranteed in deals. Those are going out to 8 different players. Robbie Ray, because we're going to just go ahead and go off the assumption that he's going to opt back in. Matt Chapman, Jung-Hoo Lee, Taylor Rogers, Jordan Hicks, Wilmer Flores, but there is a buyout involved there. I think they can save like $1 million if they buy him out, and then Tom Murphy. They have right now 4 people that are arbitration eligible. That'd be Mike Yastrzemski, Tyler Rogers, Lamont Wade Jr., and Camilo Duvall. The estimates, we won't know the final numbers till later on, but the estimates right now, Yaz at 9.5, Tyler Rogers 5.5, Lamont Wade Jr. 4.7, and then Camilo Duvall 4.6. And then there was plus like 19.17 million for players bonus pools and benefits and things like that get factored into the CBT, which puts them at a total of 159.6 off of those, 12 players. Plus you're probably running into like pre-arb players. So, we're not going to really worry about those guys yet, but it puts them at about $81.4 million under the competitive balance tax, which I would imagine they don't have any interest in paying that again next season after paying it this season. But, Greg and Buster didn't really shy away from saying, we'll spend what we think we need to spend to put a winner on the field. So, should hold them to that, in my opinion. But that's kind of a snapshot of where they're at. I'll let you guys kind of touch base on what you guys think of all those things, but we'll definitely go through the arbitration players and kind of our thoughts there in particular.
Yeah. I'll go first just because I want to say that I'm so happy that Greg Johnson didn't put his foot in his mouth this year and bring out the whole break-even comments and all that like he did last season. So kudos to him for that. But no, I think there's a few guys on that list that you can easily, kind of say goodbye to, and you should say goodbye to. For example, Tom Murphy, he's probably a guaranteed that you got to go. Wilmer Flores, I don't care if it's just $1 million. It can be $7.52 for all I care. Get him out of here too. And then Yaz is as a toss-up. Fans want to keep him around. I don't think they should. There's a good chance he might tender him a contract, and like you touched on earlier in the week, potentially move him. But no, there's a few guys on there which I think you should move off of, which could potentially have a little bit more savings. So he practiced billionaire for real, Grant, for real. But no, I mean, and I liked how they basically said, like you touched on, they'll spend what they have to spend to put a winner on the field, which is, a vote of confidence that I love to hear. So do I think they're going to go near that CBT number? Probably not, but they're going to have at least 90 plus million to spend. And I hope they spend a good majority on that.
I think it really comes down to the beginning of the offseason and really setting a tone. I think that's going to be a huge difference maker in bringing Buster in. I think Dan said it perfectly off the channel the other day. He said the Buster move is a win now move. This is not something, 5 years down the road, we'll have a championship level team and that's what we're going to aspire to do. We're going to try to win now because Buster's a competitor and he's not going to sign up for a job like this with kids and be willing to just slow play this thing. I think he's going to be fully invested in trying to, prioritize Snell right off the bat. Bring back one of your own guys and, work from within, and you have a head start on getting a deal done. And it seems like Buster's a lot more determined to be aggressive and, almost by any means necessary, just start bringing back talent, not, working off these 1 to 2 year deals and bringing in these guys on, all these guys on prove it contracts and going and doing the dumpster diving and trying to find these guys that he thinks he can, make projects out of. He's here to win now, find talent now, and immediately put a winner on the field and start getting people back in the stands consistently. So I think we're going to see that right off the bat. And, you bring Snell back, you're going to immediately set the tone for the offseason. And, with Buster being in here now, and if you bring back Snell, you're going to immediately set the tone. So you send a message to guys like, Adames, Santander, Pete Alonso, all these guys. I mean, I don't know who they're going to be targeting. Really depends. But I think you immediately kind of open those guys' eyes and say, hey, these guys are going to build something over here. And, while the farm system isn't stacked, you still do have some talent on the way as well, especially on the pitching side.
Yeah, for sure.
I did forget to mention the guys that are pending free agents. That would be, there's only 4 of them: Blake Snell, Michael Conforto, Mark Canna, and Kirk Casale.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Snell
3
pops out.
I was going to say, I think 3 of those 4 are guaranteed to go.
Yeah.
Hopefully they re-sign Snell, though.
Yeah, it's I completely agree with what Ricky just said, especially when you're talking about trying to set the tone. Because, I mean, the way I look at it is, if you bring Snell back early, like if you can get it, and I don't know if he'll be open to trying to do an early extension. I know he says he doesn't want to push it super deep again. He wants to get it figured out earlier than not. But I mean, I don't know how early that means. Like, does that mean he's going to push it closer to the winter meetings? Does that mean, it could mean a lot of different things. Maybe he is open to an extension if they come in with a number that he likes. Who knows? But if you can get that done early, it definitely sends a message. Because, I mean, think about how much better off this team would look going into the offseason than the team that they were trying to sell to people last season, where going into the offseason, they didn't have the Chapmans or the Snells around. None of those guys signed until late. I mean, even Jorge Soler didn't sign until late. So you come off of last season, as disappointing as they were, and we come off of last season where we have some young pitchers that are exciting. You have Chapman back. You have Lee's going to be returning. You have guys like Elliot Ramos now in the lineup. I mean, there's at least in Tyler Fitzgerald, we saw what he can do a little bit. I mean, there's pieces in place to where it's a little bit of an easier sell. I think they'll at least look closer. I don't know how close they are to a playoff team. I mean, I've said it a few times throughout the year that I felt like, they were just being league average with runners on third and less than 2 outs away from being like 7 wins better than they were. I mean, they lost so many close games by running into extra outs and just not doing any little things well. So it was definitely frustrating there. I agree with Dan. At least 3 of those pending free agents, they're gone. I mean, they're not coming back. And then as far as the arbitration guys, if they do want to try and create some room, it's pretty tough because I think Camilo Duvall is probably the easiest yes of all of them, which is kind of funny given the season he just had. Mm-hmm. But coming off a having a former closer, I just don't, at $4.5 million, it's not that much money. If anything, you tender him the contract and see if he can recover some of his value, and possibly move on from him later on.
Can I just say, it's crazy to think that he had 50+ mil on the table just a year ago and turned it down. And now he's going to settle arbitration for $4.5 million. That's just wild.
Yeah.
Yep.
Probably wishes he could do that one again.
Yeah, for sure.
But the crazy thing is he could have, something could happen to Walker and then Camilo could end up in the closer role again. And he just has a phenomenal season. And next thing you know, he's going to get that money and more put back on the table for him. So it's just, to me, like, you have to make that deal and see if he recovers the value. And if he's just terrible again, you non-tender him next season, or next offseason. It's an easy one at that point. But he is probably a yes. Tyler Rogers is probably a yes, although, $5.5 million for a guy that he's been good, but when it's bad, it's like really bad. That's the part I struggle with Tyler Rogers. And it feels like the league is starting to hit him more and more. as the years go by because they're getting more and more used to that delivery. The difficult ones for me turn into Yaz and Wade. I do feel like Yaz, you have to at least tender the contract. But as I've said before, I would be looking to trade him because he's too good at non-tender, but he's also not so good that I wouldn't be interested in trying to like get a, get something for him. And then Wade, I think he's definitely a non-tender candidate, but I think they're going to probably end up keeping him. And hopefully at least it's just as a reserve because they need to get an actual first baseman. So kind of my thoughts.
Yeah, with Lamont, I agree. I would tender him the contract and then go from there and try to trade him. I absolutely can't see someone like Posey looking at him and being like, oh, yeah, we're going to roll out our often injured, banged up first baseman with little to no power for a team that consistently struggles to hit for power and is in the bottom 10 of the entire MLB in home runs every year. In today's game where everybody's super reliant on the home run ball, I just can't see it. With Yaz, I mean, I personally would like to move on from some of these guys that have been around for a while, but I think I agree with Cody. I think they're going to bring him back just for his defense and the role he plays. But the thing is, you have to keep him in the fourth or fifth outfield role, and you have to stick to that. You can't have one guy get hurt and then here we are starting Yaz almost every single game, and then you have to deal with his huge cold streaks and then you see him turn into a guy when it doesn't matter. Like at the end of this season, he has half of his home runs in the last month and a half of the season. So you really got to start moving on from some of these Farhan guys, because that was the worry. If you brought Farhan back, you're going to be rolling it back with these same guys and hoping for the absolute best case scenario in order to compete. So they've got to look to move on from those guys. There's plenty of options at first base and outfield in both free agency, trade, and you could even look to give some younger guys more run as well.
Yeah, and I mean, just kind of going off of that, and I kind of touched on the last episode, and I posted about it on X. My one and only concern with Buster is, can he separate his friendships with some of these former teammates and make these tough business decisions? Because he was a teammate with Yaz, he was a teammate with Wade, teammate with Wilmer, for instance. It's like I want to see him make the tough business decisions and the ones that are going to probably piss off the fans, but it's going to be beneficial for this upcoming season and the long run by moving on from some of these older guys that have no value for the future of this team. So I hope that, he recognizes what we recognize and how you can upgrade the first base position by getting an actual first baseman. You can upgrade a starting outfield position. And I just hope that he can separate that friendship and teammate relationship that he has with them with now being their boss and make those tough moves. Because, I mean, both of you kind of hit the nail on the hammer or nail on the head or however that phrase goes. That they have value in their own ways, so to speak, but it's not going to get you over the hump. And we've seen that time and time again over these last few years under the Farhan regime. So, I mean, I can see both of them being tendered and then hopefully being shopped, but I just hope come opening day that they're both on a different roster.
Yeah. And this is where I think like everybody needs to take a step back from the analytics a little bit, where, it's easy for everyone to just hyper focus on, well, this person's worth this many WAR and this person's worth this many WAR. And that's great. In a nutshell, like it does, to an extent capture different players' values. But sometimes just because a player is worth, X amount of WAR and maybe it's more than another player, doesn't mean that player is actually going to help that team win more. Because things like balance, or balancing out a lineup, things like, whatever a team's needs are, finding different ways to be able to beat teams. Like there are other things that go into this that help win games that aren't going to be measured by a player's WAR. So like I look at Yaz, for example, and, he's pretty consistently a 2.5 wins above replacement player. And, we might look at that and go, well, he clearly has more value than playing Matos or McRae or whatever every day. But to me, it's just it doesn't. It's not really what the Giants need right now, and they need impact players. Now, if they were able to go get a Juan Soto and Snell, and then they signed Willie Adames, and now Yaz is just some role player that is going to hit 7th or 8th, and we don't, we're just like, hey, he's going to give us the defense, he'll pop a few out, cool, whatever. He'll get super hot, then awesome. But right now, like, that's not what the Giants need. They don't need a 35-year-old that's not going to have a future in San Francisco beyond 2025. Like that, to me, that's just, I think that's where Buster's going to have to realize that sometimes you have to take a step back to take a couple steps forward, and taking a step back, so to speak, by trading Yaz, where yes, it might make your team slightly weaker in the very short term, it gives you an opportunity to get better longer term, and you're getting something for him, and it clears payroll like for you to be able to afford other players too that might fit your roster needs. So that's the part where, and I don't think he's going to be completely inclined to just go super, veteran lineup, because as much as anybody, Buster understands the need to build a young core that you can win around. That is, if there's anything he would have known, like, because he won with the older roster, and then he won 2 World Series with the younger rosters, where, I mean, the older roster was more like on the position player side, obviously. They obviously had a super young pitching staff, but he kind of, I think he'll recognize that. Just kind of my 2 cents on that. So,
yeah, and I think he, like you said, he looks at the bigger picture, and you're looking to build not only a team that can compete now, but a sustainable winner. The huge issue most of us had with Farhan's building strategy is, yes, he clearly believes in, developing and drafting. I mean, he made that very clear, and he wasn't super aggressive early on in his tenure through free agency. And that is good to an extent, but you do have to balance the two. You can't go into building a team and trying to constantly build a team on the margins with, like you said, these Yaz type players, because what you're expecting at that point is these guys are marginal players, because you're going to have to live through their huge ups and their huge downs throughout the long haul of a season, especially when you're running a guy out like him consistently starting for a team like this, and a team that doesn't have those middle of the order presence. When you have guys like that, it makes it really tough to build a consistent winner, because you're banking on the absolute best out of all those players. So when you have a team that has, a floor of, say, 70 wins and a ceiling of maybe 88 wins at best, you really need to maximize every single spot on your roster. And that's the thing. They're just not able to do that. When you have a bunch of 30-year-olds with injury history like Wade and Yaz do, you're going to end up filling in with guys like McRae, who may not be ready. And to be quite honest, he's a guy we all expected to be up next year, not this year. So that's kind of what happens. And then that's when you deal with these huge low spots in the season where you're scoring like maybe, 2 runs a game, and then you quickly fall out of the playoff picture before September hits. So I definitely see him, moving on from a handful of these guys.
Yeah, what Ricky said.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. It wouldn't shock me in the slightest if Yaz ends up returning, or Wade, like any of these guys listed. The big ones for me, it's like he has to, is I need to see Flores gone. Like, it is what it is. They should have capitalized on his value when they had it. He should be gone. Tom Murphy, dump him for whatever you can, even if you're only saving half his contract or $1 million or whatever. Trade these guys for whatever you can, save a couple mil. Which it's going to bring me to my next thing, because we just looked at the Giants 40-man, because I wanted to see how many open spots they had going into the offseason, because one thing they are going to have to do is they are going to have to add the 4 guys that are on the injured list that are coming off the 60-day IL. They're going to have to add those guys back onto the 40-man when the season resets. So those 4 players are Jung-Hoo Lee, Tom Murphy, Wilmer Flores, and Keaton Wynn. Well, they only have 4 free agents leaving this season. So they are going to be right on 40 players on the 40 man. So they don't have any open spots right now, which means, every time they add someone, they're going to obviously have to remove someone, which it's not really a deterrent. I mean, I know I texted you guys this list, but I could think of like 7 or 8 people off the top of my head that they could just remove from the 40 man at any point, and it's not an issue. The guys like Kaiwei Tang and, Austin Warren and Ethan Small. And I mean, I've already mentioned Flores and Murphy, and there's a few others. I think David VR is going to probably get traded. But those guys, as far as I'm aware, Grant, Warren, and Ethan Small are still under contract for next season.
Yes, they are.
Pre-arb or minor league or whatever they're on. So they are going to have players they could easily dump, but it's just something to be mindful of, that they are right on the 40 man. And I'm going to let Ricky kind of take this over, because he was saying something to me before we started the video about the status of the 40 man roster. And it kind of explains exactly why Farhan Zaidi had to go at this point.
Yeah. So I was actually going to mention this already anyways, but something Cody and I discussed before we started the live was, a lot of people, say 2 years into Farhan's tenure, looked at the 40 man and compared it to the 40 man he took over. And we're like, wow, he really filled a lot of holes on the 40 man. You don't have as much flexibility now because you have a lot of guys in pretty set roles. And then you just have your handful of guys that kind of go back and forth between, SAC and SF, just filling in for injuries. And then you look at the 40 man he finished with, and it's very much similar to the same 40 man he took over back in 2019 when he joined the Giants organization. And you look up and down the roster, and it's so similar. You have these older 35-year-old vets, and then you have a huge collection of young, unproven guys that are pretty close to that 4A status, where they're kind of, they've done what they need to do in SAC, but they consistently haven't shown it at the big league level. And you're kind of at a spot where you need to decide, am I going to cut bait with some of these former top prospects? And am I going to fill these spots with veteran guys, or how am I going to fill out this 40 man without having to break the bank? Because that's ultimately the biggest issue he had during his tenure, is he was never able to fill out the roster with younger talent that could contribute. So he's constantly plugging holes and kind of just patching leaks in the roster with veteran, guys on 1 to 2 year deals. So you're just constantly churning the roster over and over and over year by year. And you're spending a ton of money while doing so, while not even having a high-end roster that can win you 90 games, because you're spending so much more money on these, in the margin type players. So that is ultimately what got him fired. Is the 40 man is very much similar to how it was in 2019. Obviously, you have a couple more high-end guys, but the overall look of the 40 man is very similar to what he took over when you look at it as a whole.
Yeah. You guys are absolutely right. That's a great combo. I wish I was able to chime in on, because Cody, you and I, when we had our discussion a few weeks ago about like the players we would keep or the players we would cut off the 40, we named like 12, 13 that we would just dump if we had the chance to. So that goes hand in hand with what Ricky's saying, how it's like he was in year 6 of his tenureship, and he literally had the exact same product as when he took over. So that's it makes perfect sense as to why he had to go.
100%. And the best, and this is going to tie right into the next thing. It's another kind of issue that we had with Farhan, and it's whether it's his 40 man or the his drafting, whatever you want to look at it. But the other thing the Giants are going to have to do is they're going to have to protect players that they want to protect from, or add a couple players to the 40 man to protect them from the Rule 5 draft.
I was just going to ask about that.
Yeah, and we kind of had this discussion off screen earlier today, where it was like, who do they even need to add? Because their draft in 2019 was terrible. Their draft in 2020, because right now the way the Rule 5 is, and Ricky, correct me if I'm wrong, it's if they were 18 or older, you have 4 years that you have to add them to the 40 man, unless or after those 4 years they'd be eligible for the Rule 5, and then if they were 18 or under when you acquired them, it's 5 years. Is that correct?
18 and under, 5 years, 19. Once they hit 19, it's 4 years. It goes down to 4 years. So all those college guys, you have 4 years after they're drafted, 4 seasons, and they have to be protected or put on by putting them on the 40 man. Any of those younger guys, they have that extra, that 5th year.
Yeah. So, like for instance, next season, Diego Velasquez, who was acquired in 2021, I think he was an international signee at 17 years old or something like that. He's going to need to be added if he, assuming he doesn't force the issue beforehand, they would need to add him next offseason to protect him from that. But right now, like you look back at 2020, all the guys that were any decent in 2019 and 2020, they're already on the major league roster or on that 40 man. There's no one they really need to add. They're the only name that you can really look at that probably a case could be made would be Hunter Bishop. I'm very questionable on whether or not Posey will actually add him. I would not be surprised at all if they just leave him unprotected and watch him get taken by someone else. Barracoto and Pomaris are a couple other guys, but they haven't played above AA and have had varying levels of success there. So I'm not really sure you even need to protect those guys yet, because even if they do get picked, odds are that whatever team drafts them isn't going to keep them on their roster all season and just stash them, so they'll end up back with you anyway. So yeah, I mean, there's really just nobody down there right now that needs protection, and it's just kind of an indictment on the way Farhan's drafted over the years. Like that, you're not having to protect anybody from this. Like last season, they did add McDonald, and he showed that that was for good reason. Once he got going this season, he had a little bit of injuries early, but McDonald was a good ad. I mean, Tang ended up, I get why they added him. I was saying that they should protect him too, and then he just absolutely flamed out this season. And then Eric Miller was a good protection. They ended up keeping him on the roster basically the entire season, I think. So a couple of those made sense, but those were going back to kind of 2019 and his first, the players he acquired and things like that. So it's just kind of interesting. Just kind of an added nugget to this that I wouldn't be shocked if they don't add anybody, because the only other people I could think of are like Arteaga, who had that thoracic outlet injury and he didn't play above high A. McRae would have been a guy they needed to protect, but then they ended up adding him anyway. But yeah, just kind of interesting, the status of this.
Yeah, not to beat a dead horse here, but that goes right back into the 40-man roster again in that whole situation. Ideally, each year you kind of want to have to protect, like, say, maybe 3 guys on the 40-man that are young, up-and-coming players that you see probably starting in AA or getting to AAA at some point early on in the upcoming season. And this year, like Cody said, there's really nobody, because the only guys you would ideally put on there, had they not already been added to the 40-man, would have been Fitz, McRae, McDonald, and Bishop if he had performed better, and he's still kind of a toss-up. But that goes back into the situation they're in. It's like, is a guy like Bishop really worth adding to the 40-man? Because when you look at it, like I said, you already have a 40-man littered with guys that are kind of stuck between SAC and the big leagues. And you really got to start figuring out how you're going to fill out the big league club, because when you look up and down, it could look very much like how the end of the season did in September, where you have tons of these Sacramento guys that a lot of people are complaining aren't ready. So that's where it comes down to. I don't think they have any other choice but to spend a decent amount of money this offseason if they do want to compete.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, and okay, so trying to do the math. Tyler Merrick, I think he has one more year before he would need to be added. He was a 2021 draft pick, so yeah, he should have one more year.
One more year.
Yeah.
The only other guy I can think of maybe is like a Juan Sanchez. I'm checking status for him as far as when he was when he was signed. So I'll get back on that one. But yeah, I mean, I could see, and then a guy like Carson Seymour, I'm not really sure where he's at, but or Carson Ragsdale, like either of those guys are potential arms. I'd have to check exactly when, but like those are the only other guys. But even them, I don't think you do it. It wouldn't kill them if they lost those guys.
Ragsdale's a guy you need to protect. He's already accrued 4 seasons, so
Okay. So, he's got enough good stuff that I guess maybe. Okay, so Juan Sanchez, he was in the DSL back in 2018. He would need to be added. It's been over 5 years. So Juan Sanchez is a guy I think that might be the one guy that you protect, and that's a lefty, and he could be a guy that fills in a need for them this season. He had a pretty solid year when he was healthy. Had a little bit of a rough patch, like most guys do in the PCL, but overall he was pretty solid. So maybe there's one or two candidates, I guess, now that we kind of dug in a little bit on some of the relievers. There's a couple guys that might need it. But yeah, Bishop is a little questionable. I would lean that I would probably add him depending on, the status of the roster and the 40-man later in the offseason. I'd probably just do it. And then if you got to dump him later on, you dump him later on. But he's got enough tools and talent, and he took some strides he made some strides this season with his play where I don't think I'd want to just let him walk for nothing.
Yeah.
That said, you may change your mind halfway through the season and just put him on waivers or whatever. But until Mike, I get what you're saying. We have too many outfielders, but I think some team would probably, it's one of the bottom of the barrel rosters around the league with someone to take him. And maybe they don't keep him on his roster and you can bring him back. It wouldn't hurt my feelings if they dropped him at all. He has enough tools that I'd probably keep him around just in case until a third outfielder really just takes a stranglehold on the right field job or a left field job and move Ramos to right. Until we have a third outfielder that just actually takes a stranglehold on that job, I feel like having young, talented outfielders is not a bad thing. That's kind of how I look at it. So,
yeah, I mean, if there's any spot on the 40-man where they need to make more decisions in outfield, it's really the bullpen. I was just looking back at the roster, and 12 of the 22 guys, if you throw in Win on there, even though he's on the 60-day still, 12 of their 22 guys listed on their roster on the website right now all have 2 years or less of experience. And only a few of those guys, like Tristan Beck, have more than the 1 year, which is just this last year of experience. That's crazy. So that's definitely a spot where I do think we're going to see a lot of movement. Like we touched on off the channel, Ethan Small, Austin Warren, those are guys you could easily see go. And then a ton of these other guys that were former Farhan picks, I think you could see involved in some trades trying to acquire talent in some other areas as well.
But a few people asking about, Grant, I agree. They need more lefty relievers. That's probably the biggest question, I think, in the pen. Sure. Someone asked, Grant asked, who do we think has better career, Fitzgerald or Lux? I'd lean Fitzgerald. I like his speed power combo. That's just me. But I have some concerns with his, swing and miss, like I do with a lot of players in the system.
I have concerns with Fitz's glove.
Yeah.
If they keep him at short, I have a lot of concerns.
Exactly what I'm saying. Yeah.
With Gavin Lux, my thing is I think we've had several years to kind of evaluate how he looks. And at this point, I mean, I think it's hard to go with a guy like him. With Fitz, he's still a little bit more of an unknown. But, I mean, you got to look at what Fitz did in the lineup he's in versus what Lux did at the bottom of a stacked lineup with multiple future Hall of Famers. If you can't hit behind guys like Shohei and Freddie Freeman and Mookie Betts, you're probably not that great of a hitter. And you have a guy like Fitz who, I mean, a lot of it was all in a short, sample size, but over quite a few at-bats, he had a pretty damn good season, and he had zero protection around him. It was really only him and Ramos for over 2 months that did anything at all, and Chapman.
Yeah, and going off of that, though, because I agree with both you, I just find it a little concerning with Fitz. One, like we just touched on his gloves. He had 15 errors or something like that, and not even a full season of play. And then after August, he was like a 580 OPS through the rest of the season.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, like you guys said, there's a little bit of unknown there still, so it's kind of hard to compare the two. But those are just a couple things that kind of stand out to me that are a little concerning.
Yeah. I like his game. Like, I have concerns with some things, especially the swing and miss. They started just chucking sliders down in the zone, and he couldn't lay off them, and he couldn't touch them. That's the thing with that's the big comparison I make with when like him and Casey Schmidt, for instance, is Casey Schmidt doesn't swing and miss a ton. Like, he's better than average as far as swing and miss goes. It's just pitch selection is not good, but Tyler Fitzgerald, he swings a lot of better pitches, but he still whiffs on a ton, and that's a concern. So we'll see. The one thing I do like with Fitz that he showed a lot of this season is he took a lot of extra bases. I don't know what his total stolen bases were. I think he only ended up having, I think, like 13 or 14. But he stretched a lot of singles into doubles and a couple doubles into triples. So like the home run barrage, I don't really care about that. I don't think he's ever going to be more than maybe a right around 20 home run guy. It's cool that he has these like crazy streaks where he hits a bunch, but realistically, he's probably only going to hit a few a month, most months. But the extra base potential with his speed is what I really like. And he does use the field pretty well. Overall, granted, most of his power is to his pull side. So I like Fitz. I like his game a lot more than Gavin Lux. I think there's more upside there if he can just improve a little bit on the bat to ball skills. But just kind of my feelings on that one. And I still, if Lux can't hit in that lineup, then what?
Yeah, you nailed it with that. I still just think Fitz would be a great utility player for us. I don't think he should be the starting shortstop or the starting second baseman. I think those are positions you can easily upgrade and solidify in the infield. I think he would be an ideal utility hitter for us, / pinch runner, maybe occasional pinch hitter, defensive replacement. He's kind of like a do-it-all. I would love to have Fitz in that role next season and going forward and get more solidified positions in the middle infield.
Yeah, I agree. RK, this is gonna be my one pandering today. RK says, I'm surprised the channel doesn't have more subscribers. Great channel for SF Giants news updates. Appreciate you, RK. For anybody that's watching, we do have like 45, 50 people that it's been right around there. Please do hit the like, subscribe to the channel. It helps a ton. I've said it before, the goal is to hit 1,000 by opening day 2025. So we got about 6 months to do it. I think we'll get there, but I appreciate you guys. We will be putting content out all off season. The hopes to still do weekly-ish live shows, but we'll definitely be putting other videos out as well, and then hopefully getting some guests joining.
And also, if we can get this live up to 100 viewers right now, Dan will change his name to Tunnel Man Dan since he's out of the cave now.
It's true. Man. I will.
No, notice we say this on the day that it's not the Farhan got fired and busted where we were at like 150 people watching it. That's awesome. Mike says, picture it. Wizenhunt, lefty version of Devin Williams. Isn't Devin Williams? No, he's right-handed. My head was thinking.
Yeah,
I don't think his fastball's as good. That's going to be the biggest difference. I think his changeup's every bit as good as Devin Williams, but yeah, his fastball's a bit flatter.
Mm-hmm.
But that's something that can be fixed. I think like they just get some sync on that thing, and yeah, I think that's really he is. I feel like Carson Wizenhunt is like a couple minor tweaks away from like busting out, and he had a ton of success in Sacramento this season. I mean, his ERA, like all his numbers at home versus on the road, the splits were insane. I think he had like an 8+ ERA on the road and sub 3 at home. So
yeah,
I don't think he's far off.
despite the elevation in sack.
It's very intense, though. Oh my God. So okay, so that's kind of where the stand. We're going to turn the page on the off-season preview. Like I said, we're going to do a lot more talk on who they should pursue, all those different things. I think I speak for a lot of us when I say, after watching the Willie Adames and Jesse Winker exchange, I would love to have someone with Adames' fire on the Giants roster.
Mm-hmm.
But what's up, Addy? Hopefully I pronounced that right. But yeah, I think I speak for a lot of us when I say I'd love to have that guy on the Giants. But we're not going to dive too deep into that. Next thing is, Buster Posey did say they are looking to hire a new GM. They did move Pete Patilla to an unannounced role. That they are moving him off the GM spot. I do hope they're keeping him in some kind of scouting, minor league development, some kind of role of that nature. I think it would fit his strengths great. I do think he is an asset to the organization. But, I'm glad he's sticking around, at least for now. I mean, obviously, there's always a possibility that another team offers him a better position. But
yeah,
I know you guys were kind of compiling a list of different people. I know a few names have already been thrown out there. I'll kind of get your guys' thoughts on that, but like who you think they should go for GM, bring into the organization, even if it's not as a GM, but different people that you might want to bring in. I just kind of want to hear what your guys' thoughts are there.
Or are we just talking GM or roles in general? Because if it's just GM, I've got three. I got three off the top of my head and three that I've kind of been vouching for.
Either or.
Broke. Those three for me would be Billy Owens, Scott Sharp, or Kim Eng. Those are probably the three that I would throw out as possible GM replacements, just because they're proven track records. They're proven, development history. We all know Billy Owens is great, development with the A's. So I'd be fine with any of those three. But based on, the comments that they made during the presser, it sounds as if there might be a few roles that are filled, just to kind of surround Posey with a little inner circle and front office to take on a lot of those roles. But they did say they want to make the hiring of a GM very, very quick. So those are just the three that I think would be best suited at this time.
Okay. Yeah, I agree on Billy Owens. That was one of the guys I had. I have two other different names. One of them is Logan White of the Padres. If you guys aren't familiar with him, he's currently one of the top advisors for the San Diego Padres. He's got a very lengthy resume. He's been around for a long time. He's been there since 2014, and then prior to that, he was with the Dodgers. He's actually somebody you don't really hear get a ton of credit for the Dodgers' success early on before, the Farhan and, Andrew Friedman guys came over, from the Rays and the A's. He's actually who helped the Dodgers get Clayton Kershaw, James Loney, Ryu. So he was involved in both the draft with them and internationally. So he's got a really nice track record. He also is one of the main guys responsible for the Padres going and getting Fernando Tatis from the White Sox and the James Shields trade as well. So he's got a really, really good track record with both talent evaluation and just being really well-rounded, both, in the international signings and through the draft. So he's a guy that's built two pretty consistent winners that are both in the Giants division. So he'd be a really nice guy to pry away. That would not only help the Giants, but really hurt the Padres because they've churned out a ton of talent through their farm that's really helped them bring in all these, guys at the big league level through these big trades that Preller's pulled off. You often hear Preller get all the credit in the world for pulling off all these trades, but he's one of the main guys behind bringing in this talent.
It's hard. You never know how involved the number twos are. It's so difficult. Everyone felt like we were getting a steal with Farhan. I know I was a fan of the hire when they hired him. I hear a lot of people talk where they say like, "Oh, everybody hated Farhan from day one," and I'm like, "No, dude, I loved the hire at the time." And I'll openly admit, way back in 2007 when the Giants hired Bruce Bochy, I hated the hire. I love when I'm proven wrong in those instances. I don't sit here and try and have revisionist history there. So it's just it's hard with number twos, and that's really what we're probably going to end up getting is we're not going to end up hiring a Hoyer or Epstein or Dabrowski or anything like that. It's like a proven head honcho. Like it's going to be a number two where you're just really questioning what you're going to end up getting. It could be great, could not. So sorry to cut you off.
Yeah, no, I was just going to add Cal Quantrill was another guy that he found while with the Padres, and now he's moved on to be. He was a pretty successful starter with Cleveland, and then I believe now he's in Colorado. But he's got a really nice track record, pretty lengthy scouting background, so he can evaluate talent for sure. And that's something the Giants really need to put an emphasis on, whether or not they put Pete Patilla in that role as well. And then other than those two guys, I did have one other guy, keep this one a little bit shorter, but Randy Flores of the Cardinals, director of scouting and assistant general manager. So he's had his hands in a lot of those young guys that the Cardinals have brought out year after year after year. They always have high-end prospects. He's another guy that I really think could help with the development process and puts a huge emphasis, like Cody mentioned earlier, on having a nice pool of homegrown talent and really building from within. If you can get guys like that, you can always bring in free agents. That's the easier part of the job. So really got to put an emphasis on that end of things, in my opinion.
I think the only name that I didn't hear that I'll throw in there, big shout out to Rob, who's Dan's fellow Giants community captain, is his boy Paul Taboni, the AGM with the Red Sox, who is a Bay Area native, and I think he went to Cal, right? Grew up a Giants fan, so he's done some good work helping rebuild their farm system. So I'll throw that name out there. That's about all the details I have on there. I don't have the track record that that Ricky can pull there, but that's the one name I didn't hear. I think the one thing, and almost every single person both of you guys mentioned has, that I really want to see is I want to see someone with a really strong scouting background and player development background. As Ricky said, the free agency side of things and trades, like those are quote unquote easier in the sense that kind of generally speaking what you're trying to acquire. Like you've seen those guys do it at the major league level already. And the player development side, though, like they have been so far behind on that for a long time. And I really want to get somebody in. And I think it's important that they get an outside voice. Jeremy Shelley was a guy that they mentioned. Baggerly dropped the name. They mentioned him, even like Greg Johnson mentioned him in the interview or the press conference the other day. And it's nothing against Jeremy Shelley. I just think it's important that they get an outside voice in, because clearly whatever they've been doing internally has not been working for a while. And I see Ned Colletti's been mentioned. Sabian's been mentioned. I would love to bring Sabian back in some kind of advisor role. I think a big reason why he left was probably because he felt like his opinion had been completely devalued by the previous regime. I could easily see him wanting to return in some kind of advisor role. I don't think he wants to be a day-to-day, full control of everything anyway. But I would love to see Sabian come back in some kind of advisor role. I think Buster would love having him, back in the building. But I think of all the people, it's funny. I always come back to Billy Owens because maybe it's just being in the Bay Area and seeing it, up close. Like I get the perspective a lot of people have where they don't want to pull someone from the A's, and I get the whole small market thing, but we never know how someone's going to run a franchise anyway. And Buster's the one with the final say at the end of the day. But we never know, like, are they going to act like a small market GM or Pobo or whatever? Are they going to act like a small market GM? Like Farhan kind of ran the Giants almost like a small market team, or are they going to go Andrew Friedman, who comes from Tampa Bay, goes to LA and understands like, yes, the analytics are great and stuff for filling in the back end of the roster, but I'm going to be bold and aggressive at getting the top end talent. And that's where you never know. But the one thing I do know is in the last 25 years, which is as long as Billy Owens has been in Oakland, they have had an absolute absurd amount of talent come through their system. Like, they have had as much talent come through their system and eventually end up being on other teams in the majors as any team in baseball. Like, they have basically been the farm system for Major League Baseball for years. And I would imagine that guy has some kind of, good eye for talent. So I think it'd be a good, pickup there, but we'll see.
Yeah, and I personally have zero concerns with a guy like Billy Owens, and there's one sole reason why, and that's Buster Posey. Billy Owens is not going to be the one that says, no, we're not going to spend money here. No, we're not going to spend money here. Buster is going to let the GM do his thing. He's made that very clear, but Buster is also going to be the one that ultimately has the last say in these kind of things. And Buster is not going to be afraid to spend money. He's made that very clear. So you bring in a guy like Billy Owens who can bring in the young talent and who can help with the scouting side of things and bring in his experience. And I don't really have any issue with that. I think we need to, like Cody said, remember back at all the guys that the A's have had and let go. There's no reason to believe that would be anything close to, what the Giants situation would be. It's night and day different. And it's also night and day different from the Far Anxiety situation, because Billy Owens would not have the same level of control Far Anxiety had. Far Anxiety had all the control in the world, from the lineups day to day, which we always had that theory from the beginning. He had that say. He had say over trades, drafting, the big league roster, how much money they spent. Now with a guy in the middle like Buster, in between the owners and the GM, you don't have to have those concerns with a guy that's coming from a smaller market. If anything, his job should be night and day easier, because he doesn't have to have the pressure of churning out all that young talent year after year when you have, big time free agents that can be signed and kind of fill some of those holes.
Amen, brother. Amen.
Yeah. Great talent gets great analytics.
Simple as that.
Yeah. When you have really good players, the numbers typically look really good with them.
It's funny how that works, huh?
Yeah. It's kind of
Who would have thought? Who would have thought?
George says Billy Owens gets hired by the Giants, so they trade for Brent Rooker. I mean, do I think Brent Rooker is going to repeat the season he just had? Probably not, but even if he gave 90% of the season he just had, I'd be absolutely thrilled with that production. So
I love Brent as a right-handed DH.
I think two can match. Man, so
Absolutely.
Or while Billy Owens is still with the A's, he trades Brent Rooker to the Giants for nothing, and then comes over the Giants.
then comes over.
Imagine.
I don't think Billy Ball's letting that one happen.
No, absolutely not.
they get Aldridge back. Let's be honest. Just absolutely fleecing Giants.
Yeah, no way.
Nope.
But yeah. You guys have any other topics? Anything else we want to talk about? Anybody in the chat, if you have anything you want us to cover, throw it now while you can. But I don't know what you guys have.
We can expand on Pete Patilla a little bit more, and just in terms of what his role could be. I mean, I know you guys already did your live after the Posey announcement, but just in terms of, him being a potential like higher end scouting role, that could end up making a really big difference for the Giants when we're talking about having a guy that you trust as far as the scouting side of things goes, because he has a proven track record there. And just having a guy like that with some conviction that can go, overseas and go into these different countries and really give you a good opinion on some of these international guys that you could be signing, like he did with Lee. That's a huge deal. And that kind of goes back into what I brought up with Logan White from the Padres. Another name he actually was responsible for was Yasiel Puig with the Dodgers. He was the one that had the heavy influence on that signing before he went over to San Diego. So I think keeping a guy like Pete would be huge, especially early on for Pete or for Posey. Because, as Cody already mentioned off channel, you don't really want to go and, overhaul the front office all in 1 year. You kind of need to evaluate what some of these guys are doing, and I don't see any reason why you can't keep a well-respected name like Pete around in a role he's been pretty comfortable in. So
yeah, I could see him being like a scouting director or, I know Michael Holmes I don't know what the official role or, it's the player development director of some sort. I could see him in some kind of role like that, like kind of paralleling Michael Holmes a bit, where he handles a lot of draft stuff, internal scouting, kind of all those things, where he's in kind of his element, so to speak. Like I do think that plays to his strengths. It is something that I know for the last 2 years, everybody kind of asked what the hell does Pete Patilla do, because Farhan kind of makes all the decisions, and other than randomly seeing Patilla at Jonathan Lee's last game, I think everybody kind of wondered where he was all the time. And I mean, I listened to a couple interviews that he did over the years, and one of the things that stood out to me was he would talk about how he would go to each affiliate and like spend like a week at a time at each affiliate, self-scouting, or doing internal scouting of their players, and probably also looking at some of the guys on the other teams. And then you saw how aggressively they started moving players through the system. So I do think that's his strong suit, and I think he's very valuable in something that allows him to focus on those things. George, Dan just kind of answered it. They're actually going to be right on 40 players after the season, because 4 coming off the 60-day IL, and then they lose. They have 4 pending free agents. So anybody they bring in, they're going to have to remove somebody off the 40 man.
Yeah, and just going back to your, just going back to what you touched on, as far as Pete is concerned. Maybe I'm reaching by thinking this, but I did find it interesting how during the presser, they announced that a GM spot is now vacant and Pete's going to be moved to another position. And then they also, it was asked, but Posey did emphasize the importance of scouting during that press conference. So I found it just kind of interesting with both of those comments being in the same speech, so to speak, throughout that half-hour long press. And it just makes sense based on his track record and those 2 topics that were touched on, that it makes sense for him to kind of slide into more of like a scouting position, more like an upper management though. And shouts out to the recovery.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. It says, love the show, guys. Go Giants. I never forgave Farhan for playing Trenton Brooks. I don't think we did either. Excited for Posey. We need a star player. I want Vlad Jr. Man, I would love Vlad Jr. I don't know if they'll be able to make that trade happen without including Bryce Eldridge is the tricky part. And I think in a perfect world, you'd really want both of those guys in the same lineup.
Yeah.
Even if it meant one of them's DHing. Like, I think that should be your ultimate goal if you're trying to compete, is having both those guys hitting, right after each other in the lineup. And I'm not sure they have the pieces to get that deal done without including Bryce. They may end up having to wait and just trying to get him in free agency. That said, if you can make that deal happen without including Bryce, I would do it in a heartbeat.
Do it.
Probably regardless of cost.
Trenton Brooks, man, we went through it this year, didn't we?
Did that guy ever take the bat off? Did Trenton Brooks ever take the bat off his shoulder? Because I don't remember it. It just seemed like he was always caught looking. Just always looking to get into a full count and hopefully walk.
Didn't he have a 2-pitch strikeout? I could be mistaken, but I'm pretty sure he had a 2-pitch strikeout.
Yeah.
Because he got hit with the pitch clock violation, and then he saw 2 pitches and went back to the dugout.
Yeah,
and I think
you're right.
Check swung at both of them or something like that. It's just the ugliest at bat.
The jokes write themselves, guys.
Yeah, they really do. Goldschmidt is our bridge. This would not surprise me. He actually was projected on the Bleacher Report. They did a couple players that they could see getting signed in certain places. Goldschmidt, they predicted would come to the Giants. I don't hate it. If anything, he's still great defensively at first, and probably would knock 20 out of the park. Decent with runners in scoring position. He's not the player he used to be, but good defense and at least something productive offensively, and we would be in probably better shape.
See, I'm convinced Bleacher Report watches the show because I literally said that on Monday. So, yeah, they need to give me credit.
It's a good follow-up.
Good, perfect timing.
Yeah, Frederick says Goldie seems to like hitting an Oracle. I mean, I agree. I was there when he hit a ball like 470 feet off Tim Lincecum.
He's terrorized us for years, bro.
Just brutal.
Yep.
Yeah. Christian Walker. Mike says if Christian Walker doesn't resign with Arizona, I could see Arizona in a Goldie reunion. Yeah, I mean, that'd be possible for them. I don't know their system as well, so I'm not sure what I'm not sure what they might have coming through the system to play first, but yeah, I mean, that's certainly possible for them.
And George, we've touched on Christian Walker. The problem you run into is he's most likely going to demand a multi-year contract, and Eldridge is at most 1 year away. So you don't want to risk blocking him by going after Walker. Now, if you can land Walker on a 1 year deal, by all means, do it. But you don't want to make that deal because he's too good of a defensive player to DH, and you don't want to block Eldridge at first. So it kind of clashes a little bit.
Yeah, it's really tough because they could coexist. I think if you can get him on 2 years, like I'd maybe do it and then like kind of ease Eldridge into it, but it's hard because I think it's where you have to balance what's best for Eldridge's development and do it. And you're balancing that on top of like trying to win as many possible games. Because I mean, if you're just trying to win as many games as possible, you could easily throw Eldridge at DH and put Walker at first and just be like, yeah, cool, we're good. But if you want Eldridge to be like the best version of himself that you can, like you're gonna want to play him every day at first and like let him improve and develop. So it just turns into a tricky thing.
Like you said, give him the Freddie Freeman treatment.
Yeah, I don't care if he struggles; just play him every day. Yeah. Like people forget, Freddie Freeman was terrible for like the first month of his career, month and a half, almost 2 months, and Atlanta just didn't blink. They just were like, "Dude, you're gonna play every day, all season," and they let him go. And he figured it out. So, did you guys see this comment? Sorry. Oh yeah, go ahead, Ricky. If you gotta.
Oh no, I was actually going to touch on the recoveries comment and then pair that with, was it Frederick about Corbin Burns? I absolutely think the Giants are going to make those two guys their priority. If they can't get Snell done early and they have to move off, then yeah, Burns for sure. Like we mentioned in previous lives, Corbin Burns went to St. Mary's, familiar with the area. Obviously fits great in this park. I don't see any reason why they couldn't do it. I believe he's a year younger than Snell and is a lot more of an innings eater than Snell is. So kind of pick your poison. I definitely think Posey's going to prioritize trying to bring in one of those guys because, he talked about it multiple times, having an identity, and it ultimately starts with pitching and defense in this park. So, I mean, yeah, pair that with Goldschmidt at first. You have a huge upgrade at first, both in the power department and on defense. And now you're kind of building an identity. But I'll let you touch on the JT Snow comments because I got my own thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, I have thoughts on this. So I don't know how we're all going to feel, but whoever wants to go first.
I mean, I'll throw it out there. Like, I get where Snow's coming from. Like, I will say, I do understand where he's coming from in the sense that, like, you are getting paid to do your job. So go do your job. Like, I get it's an old school way of thinking, but, like, I do understand that. Now, that said, I do feel like part of his comment was just so ignorant as hell to sit there and say, you're not going to get hurt. Bro, you don't know that he's not going to get hurt. He could blow out his arm in the second inning. And, it, like, not to – I don't like making a joke about this, but, like, you could Dave Dravecky your arm in the second inning and be done, like, career over.
Yeah.
You never know when that moment can happen. So I just thought it was ignorant as hell to say, like, you're not going to get hurt. You're fine. But I do get the sentiment of what he's saying. Like, I do understand, like, you're paid to do a job. you were wildly disappointing in the first half. I mean, really, in the grand scheme of things, like you weren't a $31 million pitcher, no matter how great your second half was, because you were that useless in the first 3.5 months of the season. But I agree with Snell, and I get what he was saying when he was like, if it was a team trying to make the playoffs, like for the integrity of the game, I'd have pitched. And yeah, like I kind of agree with Snell there. Where it's like it's a business decision, and it sounded like it was a mutual decision. I think I heard that the Giants kind of like they both talked about it, and they're like, "Yeah, dude, don't." It's in the best for him. But that was just my feelings on it.
No, 100%. And I understand both sides. I've been very open. JT Snow was one of my favorite players when I was a kid growing up. I got nothing but love and respect for him. But he's got a very old school mindset with this topic. And what I mean by that is, like you guys just touched on, with Snell's perspective, he openly said, hey, look, if it was, he didn't say this quote unquote, but basically he just said, hey, if this game meant something, I would absolutely go and pitch. But what else does he have to go out there and prove? I mean, yeah, he struggled the first 3 months because he didn't have an off season. He battled 2 different types of injuries. Then once he was fully healthy and had his quote unquote spring training with his, extended IL stint, he was lights out and dominant. What else does he have to prove by coming in and pitching 3 or 4 innings in a meaningless game where, like you said, he could potentially get injured and it has no effect on your team or the Cardinals as far as, their playoff chances. So it's like, and it was mutual by the team and by Snell. Like, hey, there's really no point in you pitching. We're going to take the day off. So I get both sides where it's coming from. But yeah, like you said, and I was going to say that pretty much quote unquote, like it's super ignorant to say, go pitch 3 or 4 innings. You're not going to get hurt. Like, bro, we've seen pitchers get nailed by a line drive and boom, careers alter. We've seen these pitchers, throw out their arm, their elbow, some freak play happens. Like, you don't know that. Like, dude's trying to lock in a long-term deal, which will be the final deal of his career is what he's hoping for. There's no point in a meaningless game for you to go out there and risk jeopardizing hundreds of millions of dollars and the rest of your career. So I love JT, but yeah, you're wrong, brother.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just a very ignorant comment, in my opinion. Nothing against JT, but just don't really agree with it. I mean, ultimately, it benefits the team in multiple aspects. One, you built up a horrible reputation under Farhan in terms of being a player-first organization. You kind of want to start, changing that reputation, especially with a regime change. You don't want to continue being that place that players don't want to go because you have a president of baseball operations that doesn't care about the players or doesn't treat players well and kind of just ships players out left and right. You don't want to have that kind of reputation. So that's my first thought. My second thought is that was a game where I believe Roop started, correct? Roop started that last game, right?
Was it Roop or was it
or Black?
No, Beck.
It was Beck, right?
It was Beck.
Yeah.
Okay. Either way,
one of the young guys.
One of those 3 guys, they got a nice little look at the end of the season, and that's ultimately what you want to accomplish when you're out of the running with a month left in the season. You don't want to be running out Snell for 3-4 innings with nothing to prove. And not to mention, like I just said, if you want to give him a little rest at the end of the season, and this is a guy you're interested in bringing back, do the guy a solid. Like, who cares? You're getting an extended look at a younger guy in a meaningless game where it doesn't matter. The guy can work on things, or he can give you a little bit of a look onto, hey, this might be a guy we want to keep around for next year, which I think we already kind of knew with Beck. I mean, I think he has a pretty solidified role as long as he, doesn't completely blow up in the spring. But even then, he has options. So there's no downside into him sitting. So ultimately, if Posey, the guy with 3 championships under his belt, wants him back, sorry, JT, what have you done?
Yeah,
that's my thoughts. Good, solid player. I love the guy as a Giant, great defender, but ultimately, let's leave that up to Posey.
I'd love JT in some kind of assistant role, helping Bryce Eldridge at first.
For sure.
Him, Clark, Belt. I mean, hey, there's talk like, is Posey going to go get the band together? And I'm like, hell, if he could get Crawford and Bell to come be infield coaches and help some of these young,
For sure.
some of these guys around the infield. But I'm all for it. But
well, see, that was what I was just gonna say. Like, I was just gonna touch on that. I mean, I obviously hope it won't be an issue, but what happens if, because last year there was speculation that JT Snow was interested in taking a coaching job and Farhan couldn't get his number. So what happens if this year he does land a coaching spot and then you do re-sign Snell? And is it just kind of like weird between the two of them? Because like, oh, what's up, dude? You're talking all that smack after the season ended. Or is it just going to be like one of those things like, yeah, we'll squash it. So that's my thing. Like, is that going to be an issue, or are they just going to be like grown men about it,
Yeah. I think they'd figure it out. I think at the end of the day, they'd figure out how to be adults and grown men and move on. But yeah, Frederick, if that's his attitude, he probably shouldn't be coaching. Yeah, I mean, not wrong. So, but I mean, it is a very coaching mindset, I think, though.
It's an old school mindset for sure.
It's a very old school, and it's definitely the mindset of a coach manager of like, dude, you're paid to do a job, go do your job. Like, I don't get to take the last day of the year off just because we suck. Like, I get it. So,
well, also going on old school mindsets, I don't know if you guys saw, it was Will Clark was interviewed today, and he basically had a quote that came out and was like, if you're batting 250, 240, 230, you're demoted. Like, just kind of, it just goes to show like how insane of a difference there is between like an old school baseball and new school baseball, and like kind of the old school mindsets and new school mindsets. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's tough because I don't, pitching is like major leaguers have better stuff than they've ever had previously, like overall stuff, and they're throwing all kinds of different movements. I know they've been talking about like the different sciences, like with all the slow-mo and the spin rates and everything. It's easier to improve pitchers than it is any other position, which I get. But like on the flip side, there's such an emphasis on power nowadays, and it's like there's no reason people still couldn't. There still couldn't be more guys hitting like 280, 290. Like, yeah, maybe we're not going to have as many guys hitting 300 as there ever was before. But, like, nobody can convince me that the league should be, like, 40 points worse than it used to be. Like, I need to actually look at, like, league batting average now compared to, like, 30 years ago. But it feels like it is just so down compared to what it used to be. So.
But war, bro.
Yeah, I look at it both ways. I do agree with Will Clark to an extent. I mean, he's obviously one of my favorite Giants for sure, but ultimately we saw a huge shift less than 10 years ago after the Giants went on their, 3 World Series run. With pitching, I mean, ultimately you look at how the Giants bullpen was built during those years. They didn't have a bunch of guys throwing the high 90s, but you started to see it right around that time. Each bullpen started getting one of those guys that was throwing in the hundreds. Now those kind of guys grow on trees, and that's ultimately really shifted the way baseball is being played. You have a lot of guys going, 100-mile-an-hour fastball with a hard slider, a slider that's, up to 7 to 8 miles an hour harder than what it was back in the 2010s. So, yeah, you are seeing a different shift in the way guys are hitting, because it's a little bit easier to kind of swing for the fences when you're facing pitching like that as early as the 5th or 6th inning, not to mention some team starters. So it's a little bit harder to just easily say, oh, yeah, 102-mile-an-hour fastball, I'm going to go take that 2-seamer and take it the other way because, there's a hole between first and second. It's like, it's really not that simple, man.
Yeah.
And I know Will Clark has a great track record. I'm not knocking that, but, the pitching was night and day different. You were facing a lot of starters with stuff in the low 90s. So it's really hard to compare the two eras.
And see, I think that's kind of like why this season was so difficult between, Farhan and his new school analytic approach methodology and Bob Melvin being, obviously an old school catcher and a longtime manager with more of an old school approach. It was hard for them to find that balance between the two. And I think that's why Posey can kind of, come in and implement more of that balance between that, because obviously Posey started towards the end of like the old school era, so to speak, because like he touched on around 10 years ago. So when we saw the shift. And he went through his prime and then the end of his playing career with that whole transition and then seeing where we are now. So I think that's why it's huge for, they touched on in the press conference, are we going to use analytics? And Posey was like, yeah, we're going to use analytics. And I tweeted about this or posted or whatever you want to call it, of how it's like every team in every sport across every level uses analytics to an extent. Analytics aren't the problem. It's when you start relying on analytics more than having a feel for the game where it becomes an issue. And I think we saw a lot of that clashing over this past season with the Farhan, having his dirty little sausage fingers and everything in every aspect of the game. So I think getting Posey in it'll help kind of solidify and balance that out. And
it needs to be a tool, not a crutch.
Exactly.
That is the way I look at it.
Exactly.
And I'm going to touch on this. I put it down because it was blocking your face. But use older insight where we don't have good analytics for command and pitch sequencing, not whether hitting for power and striking out more is good. We know modern is correct there. And I think it's correct in the overall value. My issue with it, and it's going to tie into what the recovery said, which, dang, dude, thanks again. We'll pull his up, is there needs to be a balance there. Like, yes, in the generally speaking, it's, generally speaking, yes, like hitting for more power and more strikeouts, it's probably better in like over 162 game season as far as value goes and helping win. But like, you can't tell me that when there's a runner on third and one out, like the guy shouldn't adjust and try and do something to get that guy in. Like, that's where it's like a strikeout there kills you, whereas just a decently deep fly ball or a ground ball to the second baseman is going to get the run in. So like, there needs to be balance there. And Frederick, all models are wrong, but some are useful. And the other one I'd point to is today was a perfect example. In a playoff game, we have a catcher trying to frame a pitch
in the dirt. You like that?
And yeah, I know Dad tagged me in this, and I hit him with a fun little GIF off of it. But like, you have a catcher in the playoffs in a tie game trying to frame a pitch in the dirt, and it ends up being a wild pitch. He's in the one knee down, and he's sitting there trying to frame it instead of blocking the ball. And it's like, sure, maybe the analytics tell you that stealing strikes is more valuable than blocking balls in the dirt, but it sure looked like that one knee was down. But it was just poor mechanics either way. Like, I don't really care. The point being, he was out there more focused on framing than he was actually blocking. So it's like, you have these guys like taught that, and it's ingrained in their heads that it's more important to frame than it is to block, and they're doing this stuff even when there's a runner on third base, and like, that just kills me, man. Like, that just kills me. That nobody can convince me that is in the best interest of winning ball games in those situations.
It all comes back to analytics, and like what the recovery said right here, this is the Justin Villi methodology 101 right here. Like, this has been an issue with the Giants since after 2021, which was when Donnie Ecker left and when Villi took the reins over, and why I've been screaming for him to get lost and get sent to the KBO. Like, I'm over it, because I pointed out a stat in the middle of the season, and the Giants were like 28% higher than the second team as far as looking at fastballs right down the middle, and that just goes hand in hand with the hitting approach developed by Justin Villi. And that goes hand in hand with everything else as far as how the team was constructed in general, as far as, being so analytically inclined that you forget to just have a genuine feel for the game. And you gotta change some things around. Life isn't all about, framing pitches and, having that exit velocity and having that, uppercut swing path and, all that BS, dude. You got to have a feel for the game in the moment. Use analytics as, a support tool in times, but don't rely on it to get you from point A to point B.
And I wanted to
tells you a lot. So. Okay.
I wanted to touch on Bub's comment regarding Will Clark. I wasn't saying Will Clark wouldn't be able to hit today's velo. I was saying that there's times where he talks about guys needing to go the other way and change their approach, which I do agree with. But you're saying he hit a home run off Nolan Ryan in his first MLB at bat. a little bit different getting a four-seamer over the middle of the plate versus a 102-mile-an-hour sinker in today's game. The stuff is night and day different is all I'm saying. I'm not saying Will Clark wouldn't succeed in today's game. I'm just saying it's a little bit harder to hit to all fields based on the stuff that's getting thrown at you in today's game. That's all I'm saying. So,
yeah,
just clarifying on that.
Yeah.
And that's why, like, there is more value in the power and stuff like that, because it is harder than ever just to even put the ball in play. But that doesn't mean these guys shouldn't be able to adjust with two strikes or situationally.
100%.
Like, you don't. Sometimes it's not even needing to adjust. Like, the part that pissed me off so much this season was kind of like Recovery said there. It's like they could get a runner on third and one out, and they're taking a grooved fastball. It's like, I don't need you to hit that in the seats. I don't need to work a count. I need you to just get the damn runner in. Like, that's what you need in those situations. And that's why earlier in the show I mentioned that I don't necessarily feel like the team was as far off as we make it out to be, because they were one of the worst teams I've ever watched in my life with just situational hitting like that. And if they were just league average, they would probably have won 7 more games this season, or 8 games, and been like right in it till the end. So I mean, yes, there is a lot, a talent disparity that they need to make up a little bit. But if they were just a better coach team and better, situationally, they could have at least been close. I felt like with the current talent.
Yeah, and going back to the Veely mindset, the biggest issue I have is there's just a little bit too much guessing what pitch is coming and waiting for that one specific pitch to come. Like you said, you have a runner on third with less than 2 outs. You need to get a ball in the air. If they're grooving a fastball in there on the first pitch, you shouldn't be taking it because you're looking for a slider to try to yank. It's like, no, hit a fly ball, get the guy in. These last, honestly, 3 to 4 years, I don't think I've ever seen a team so horrible at not only bunting, but just hitting fly balls with less than 2 outs and a guy on second or third. Those make such a huge difference when you're a team like the Giants that need to win in the margins and you're losing 1 and 2 run games consistently. It's like all these little games add up when you're not even slumping, but you're losing, 2 out of 3 versus winning 2 out of 3 throughout the season. And then, you end up missing the playoffs like in some of these years by only a few games. Makes a huge difference, and I feel like most of the Giants hitters just lack that. And I don't think it's ability; it's just approach and preparation.
100%.
That was the one thing with a guy like Elliot Ramos. Like, I felt like he was actually pretty good at getting the ball in play for the most part in those situations. I'd have to really actually dive in on like what his K percentage looked like with whether it's a runner on third and less than 2 outs or anything. Like, I'd have to really like dive on situational, at ABs like that. But it felt like he did a better job of grinding out at bats in those situations where he didn't strike out as frequently. He clearly has, a little bit of a swing and miss, and he has some chase zones that we're gonna hopefully he'll improve on next season. But it's just there's certain guys that you can tell kind of like have a little bit more of that mindset, and then there's other guys that's just like every big at bat it felt like he struck out. And I don't want to dump on Matt Chapman, but that guy, like, he had a really good season on the surface, but like with runners in scoring position, if there was one big wart on his season, it was clearly runners in scoring position, because he really should have had a 90-plus RBI season, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But it was pretty rough in those situations.
For sure.
Hey, Belly's a solid run producer. That's part of my draw to Adamas, is how good he is with runners in scoring position. Belly historically has been good.
Yeah. We've been on the Belly train since last offseason. For being real.
Yeah, Frederick, I'm not saying Chapman didn't have a great season.
He's just mentioning that it could have been better because the one area that Chappie struggled in was runners in scoring position. That's all.
And that's not even deniable. Like, the numbers support that. Like, Chapman was terrible in those situations. Very good in pretty much every other situation. Terrible in those ones. So it was pretty rough. So Adamas with a one. Yeah. I mean, I'm sorry, anytime you have like 111 RBIs, and this is just kind of his, I don't know if it was 111 or something like that, but yeah, I mean, he had 110 plus RBIs. He was real good in those situations. But yeah, we'll see. But I don't know. I think that's a good point. Good point to wrap it up on. You guys have anything else you want to talk about?
No.
No, we'll dive into a lot more as the offseason progresses.
Yeah. Only thing I'm going to add to this: if you're hitting a 3-run home run, then you're doing it with runners in scoring position. So I'm all for it. just get the job done. I don't care how you get them in.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I mean, there was a point in time where the Giants actually were a guaranteed win every time they did a 3-run homer. Don't know that's the case anymore.
I miss those days, man. They just
Good
went like
times.
full 70s Earl Weaver Orioles. Awesome. All right, everybody. Appreciate you guys all joining us. We'll figure out next week's show. I don't, hopefully we have a GM by then. And we'll certainly be talking about that if they have hired one by then. I know that's something they've talked about wanting to do as fast as possible, but they do have some time in the sense that the season doesn't officially end for probably closer to about a month. So I don't know how quick they're going to end up moving on this, but we will see.
And hopefully another interview in the next week or so too.
Yeah. We'll have to reach
something
out to that. Yeah. We should reach out to him, see when he wants to do it, because I'm ready whenever he is. So
we'll get on that tomorrow for sure.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Once we have it confirmed, we'll let you guys know who. For those that pay a lot of attention, we may have name dropped him at one point in this thing. So anybody that wants to dig and try and figure it out, good for you.
Here's a hint. His name rhymes with Zarhan Fighty. It's gonna be a 30-minute roast session. Me and Cody and Ricky teaming up and just letting them have it. So tune in, grab your popcorn.
Every time he would try and talk, I'd be doing so much research on how to like freeze up people's screens, and I would literally freeze his screen and run the dial-up tone.
Perfect. And Cody's gonna have a recording of a stupid little giggle, and we're just gonna play that nonstop.
Oh man, it's terrible.
At least you always knew when he was lying because that giggle came out.
Yeah. I mean, I sit here and giggle around while I'm talking, but like, I used to just drove me insane. It's like, dude, you just come on, man. It's such a different. It's so different listening to Posey give an interview than listening to Farhan. It's night and day. It's insane.
Yeah.
But, all right, everybody. You guys have a good you guys have a good Thursday night. Enjoy your Friday. Enjoy your weekend. Got football coming up this weekend. Hopefully the Niners win that. And I don't know. That's all I got.
That's all I got. Good night, fellas.
Yep.
Night,
Thank
everyone.
you, guys.